in court of protection, it is all for, you're all working for the good of one person and in their best interests, which is our overriding principle. And so I find it very rewarding when you make a decision and you know that it's really going to positively impact someone, moving them to a different flat, which is going to suit their needs so much better. It's very rewarding.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Student Lawyer podcast series. Whether you're at school, sixth form, university, thinking about a career in law, or exploring law careers, you're in the right place. We are the one-stop shop for student lawyers. If you'd like to join the Student Lawyer as a writer, please email hello@thestudentLawyer.com. Welcome to the Student Lawyer podcast series. My name's Camilla. I'm a trainee solicitor and I am the host for today's show. In this episode, we're joined by Philippa Davies, a 7 PQE solicitor at Dawson, Cornwall, specialising in matrimonial and family law, as well as court of protection matters. And in today's episode, we'll be delving into Philippa's career journey and finding out more about family and court of protection law, which is a fascinating area of law that's not talked about a lot. So without further ado, let's welcome Philippa onto the show. Welcome, Philippa. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And I wondered if we could kick off the episode just by starting off, getting a little bit of insight into your career journey so far.
Of course, yes. Well, my original plan many years ago was to do law at university and go down the sort of traditional route, but I changed my mind at pretty much the very last minute and decided to do languages instead. So I went off to Exeter and I did French and Russian because I thought, well, if I want to go into law afterwards, I've still got the GDL route. So after university, I went off and worked as a PA for a while in the city, in a headhunters, which turned out to be a really great experience and incredibly useful. But after a couple of years, I thought, no, I think law is calling. So I went off and I did the GDL at BPP and then the LPC. And then I worked as a paralegal for 3 years at Stewart's Law. I did 2 years in catastrophic personal injury, which was slightly unexpected because I wanted to go straight into family, but I did catastrophic PI and it was amazing. It was so interesting. Then a spot came up in family, so I moved over to family for a year. And then I left Stewart's to go to Dawson, Cornwall, where I did my training contract, and I've been there ever since.
Fascinating. I really like the fact that you didn't just go straight into law either. You had that experience as a headhunter, and I can imagine that that really gave you some great skills. So yeah, that's really interesting. And what is court of protection law, and why did you decide to qualify into family and court of protection law?
So first of all, court of protection is a court which makes decisions on behalf of those who cannot do so because they lack mental capacity. It was set up following the Mental Capacity Act 2005, which is our key piece of legislation we use all the time we call it COP, Court of Protection. So in COP work, we use the Mental Capacity Act all the time. And so the court can make decisions for people, such as whether they have capacity, whether a deputy should be appointed, so that's somebody to make decisions on behalf of the person who can no longer do so. They can remove deputies or attorneys under a power of attorney if they are failing to carry out their duties. They can make particular decisions on financial matters, such as whether to sell somebody's house, or welfare matters, and that comes up quite a lot in the press. You read more about sort of health and welfare, such as whether somebody should have a particular sort of treatment in hospital, or whether they have the capacity to marry or enter into a sexual relationship. So it's all sorts of things that someone can no longer make decisions for themselves. So that's court of protection law. And so you said, why did I decide to go into it? Well, Dawson Cornwall specialises in family law, and I've always really wanted to do family. So I started doing that. I qualified into family And it was just because the partner that I work for became a panel deputy. So he's on the Office of the Public Guardian's panel of deputies. And so once I began working for him, I picked up a lot of court of protection work, which I have been doing with him. And it turned out that I absolutely love it. And so I now do about 90% of COP work and a lot less matrimonial.
Again, I think that's interesting because sometimes people can go into a law career with a preconception of the idea of law that they want to practice, and then something will come along and that's totally unexpected, and they'll fall in love with it. So, it's always that sort of advice to keep an open mind. And I can see that that's almost what's happened in your situation. You didn't expect or you didn't foresee court of protection as an area that you'd be practicing in, but look at you now. So yeah,
that's absolutely right. I think exactly as you say, it's so important to keep an open mind, because life sort of offers you these strange opportunities that you never thought of before, or areas of law that you've never heard of, and you could think, well, I just, that's not what I want to do, it's not in my plan. But if you give things a go, it can turn out that they are completely up your street and absolutely fascinating, and you want to stay there. And that's what's happened with me in court of protection for sure.
Absolutely. And what does a typical day look like for you, if there is such a thing?
Well, because I support my boss, who is the panel deputy, as I explained earlier, the work is really varied. It is all property and affairs. So it's all about people's money and investments and properties and that sort of thing. But just as everyone has an incredibly different life that they lead, that means that all the work is very different. It's often the case that a lot of our patients, the people that we work for, our clients, they have Alzheimer's or dementia. And because a panel deputy is a deputy of last resort, often these people don't have family members who can step in and help them. And so in the years before their diagnosis and before we get put in to help them, before appointed by the Court of Protection, things are getting quite chaotic. So by the time that we are appointed, we have to try and make sense of somebody's life. And we always say it's a bit like having a jigsaw where all the pieces have been thrown up in the air and you've only got two edge pieces, or, trying to piece it all together is very tricky. So that makes my day quite varied. So I tend to do more of the contentious side of work. So I'm quite often drafting applications to the court for authority to sell property or to be appointed as a replacement trustee. There's also a lot of satellite matters that come up, such as possession proceedings, which is another area of law which I didn't really know a lot about, but have become involved in, when we have to seek authority to begin possession proceedings against someone who's in the patient's home, quite often an adult child who refuses to leave and will make no financial contribution when their parent has a lot of care fees that they need to pay. And then I will deal with the possession proceedings as well. So there's a lot of, it's very paperwork heavy, but it's really varied. Sometimes as well, I'm off down to somebody's home to go and see them and talk to them about an application that we're going to make, or sometimes to a care home to visit them. So it can be a very varied day, certainly very varied subject matter, a lot of plate spinning.
Yeah, it does sound like it can be definitely challenging, but then, where there's challenges, there's often rewards. So I wondered perhaps if you could go into perhaps the most challenging and most rewarding parts of your job.
It's challenging by its nature because, like I said, there's often a lack of clarity as to how someone has run their life, and trying to piece it all together can be tricky. There are some administrative challenges as well with the court, as there are with any court. They're completely overburdened, not enough staff. And so it can be frustrating when you apply for an order for example, authority to sell somebody's home, because they've gone into a care home and they're not coming back and they need to free up the capital to pay care fees or something like that. And it can take 4 or 5 months to get an order, which that can be quite frustrating, although we are quite used to it now. Another frustrating, well, not frustrating, but challenging thing can be a family dynamic, because sometimes the reason that we're put in as deputy is because there's been, for example, one of the children of the patient was an attorney under a lasting power of attorney. Another sibling might accuse them of financial abuse, and the family breakdown can really escalate. The one thing they tend to agree on is that they really dislike the court-appointed deputy. So there can be some quite challenging family dynamics, either sort of towards us or just trying to deal with all of the family members insofar as we need to. So that can be a challenge. But it's, like I say, I find it very rewarding work. Just what I really like about it is the fact that everybody is working for the good of one person, because family work is equally fascinating, but it is by its nature adversarial, whereas in court of protection it is all for you're all working for the good of one person and in their best interests, which is our overriding principle. And so I find it very rewarding when you make a decision and you know that it's really going to positively impact someone, like moving them to a different flat, which is going to suit their needs so much better. It's very rewarding.
Yeah, that must have a real impact on somebody's life, like where they live and their ability to pay off certain debts or anything like that. So I think
and to make them comfortable in what is often the last months, years of their life is very rewarding.
Absolutely.
For the past 4 years, I have been very lucky in the sense that I have had the shoulders of friends and family to sob on, and unfortunately for them to vent at, whilst I have been under pressure and stress from university deadlines, and whilst going through the grueling process of training contract applications and interviews. They have been my unofficial therapists, and during tough times have reminded me that there is always light at the end of the tunnel. But it's not always possible to rely on a friend or family member to help you through difficult times, especially if they are not trained therapists. And sometimes speaking to somebody outside of your family or friendship circle is a better option anyway. If you're going through stressful times, looking to improve the quality of your life, vent or need somebody to remove the weight of the world from your shoulders, BetterHelp, the sponsor of today's podcast, may be right for you. BetterHelp is the largest therapy platform in the world, and it changes the way people approach their mental health and helps them tackle life's challenges by providing accessible and affordable care. The therapists at BetterHelp are qualified to help you through everything from daily stresses to anxiety, relationships, depression, addictions, eating, sleeping, trauma, anger, family conflicts, grief, self-esteem, and much more. After you sign up, BetterHelp will match you to a therapist who fits your objectives, preferences, and the type of issues that you are dealing with. So whilst a friend or family member, aka an unofficial therapist, is great to speak to, therapists on BetterHelp include psychologists, family therapists, licensed clinical social workers, and licensed professional counsellors. Visit www.betterhelp.com/TSL for 10% off your first month. That's www.betterhelp.com/TSL for 10% off of your first month. I know that I'm looking forward to using BetterHelp to help me get through the SQE when I start it next year.
And so what do you think are some of the qualities that aspiring family lawyers or court of protection lawyers should try to develop?
Well, I think with both family and court of protection, you've got to be very interested in people on sort of individual level. I always sort of quite fancy getting into family because I'm quite nosy. So I think a lot of people would say that about family lawyers. You know, it's interesting getting into hearing what people are up to and that sort of thing. And so I guess it's kind of the same with court of protection, really. You've got to want to connect with someone and be genuinely interested in their life. And so having a lot of empathy for both is very important. And being interested, being sympathetic, being patient. You need a lot of patience in both areas, and probably developing a thick skin as well. With family, you don't tend to see people at their best when they're going through divorce or any sort of argument to do with their children. They definitely you see people at their most hurt, and like I say, with Court of Protection, if you're having to deal with aggrieved family members, that can also be quite challenging. So you have to develop a thicker skin and remember that you're all working for the good of the patient, and try to take things on the chin a bit.
And just linking that back to perhaps how students could perhaps begin to develop those skills before they actually get into the role. So when you were speaking, it sort of took me back to my days in customer service roles. And working behind bars, because you have to learn how to deal with people very, very well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just wondered if you had any experience with that, or if you know anybody who has done any jobs which have helped them sort of get the skills that are required for family or court of protection lawyers.
Yes, you're right, actually. It doesn't necessarily need to be a job in law. I spent many years waitressing and doing bar work, and I think, as you say, it's also valuable, isn't it? Equally, having worked as a PA before going into law, that has stood me in such good stead. Is not the personal qualities that you need, but for becoming a solicitor, because it teaches you to be incredibly organised, and that is just absolutely key. But yes, in terms of personal qualities, certainly customer-facing roles and dealing with the great British public is certainly an education and very useful. And then more legal work, working at the CAB, volunteering at the CAB, I did that, and it was excellent, because you kind of become quite a generalist, because you end up, well, most people there anyway, if you're volunteering, you have to advise about everything. And so you can have family work come in, and I'm sure it does far more now than when I was there. Now that the legal aid has been cut, I expect there's a lot more people who come in. And also court of protection matters crop up as well, because people do come in, vulnerable people, or perhaps older people who got in a muddle with mortgage repayments. We have someone like this at the moment, and she went to the CAB, and that's how the Court of Protection became involved. And so it's certainly the case that working somewhere like that will help you develop the skills that you need for law, and particularly in these more client-facing areas of law.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I remember I volunteered at the Citizens Advice Bureau back in the day as well, and it was a really great experience. So I definitely echo that. And I wondered if you've got any advice for our listeners who are interested in exploring family law or court of protection law further, and what they can do or where they can go. Well,
because it's both such fascinating areas of law, they do tend to be covered in the media quite a lot. So keep your eyes peeled for the stories. Often family stories are quite sensationalized when they're put in the paper. Some wife has got all this money from the man and whatever, Daily Mail type stories. But if you then go off and read the judgments, you'll probably find that very interesting, and it all comes down to certain principles of law. So that's always very interesting to look at. And yes, like I say, you'll sort of come across those. Court of protection, there tend to be far more reported cases in health and welfare, which I don't deal with so much. I do some health and welfare, and it's always fascinating, but not quite so much. But you will come across stories like that in the press. Otherwise, there is a barristers' chambers called 39 Essex, and they do monthly Court of Protection law updates, which are always brilliant, and anyone can subscribe to that. So if you're interested in Court of Protection law, it's worth subscribing to that newsletter, I would say.
That's great. And what I'll do is try and leave a link for it in the or their website, 39 Essex, in the description box, so that any of our listeners can refer back to that if they don't have a pen handy. Okay, and I wondered if there's any news stories or developments in the law that our listeners should be following to keep up to date with developments in family law or court of protection law, if they are interested in those areas.
Well, as I say, there's always lots in the papers about it. There's some reform in terms of family law possibly coming our way, because our main piece of legislation is from 1973, the Matrimonial Causes Act. And so there's some discussion at the moment about whether that should be revised for the modern time, and lots of debate back and forth. There's also a lot of debate about transparency in the family courts at the moment, which is going on. So that's quite often in the press, and that's interesting. Court of protection, like I say, there's less about property and affairs because it's you just don't get so many judgments reported, more about health and welfare. And it's always interesting to read cases about treatment that people are bringing, a bit like you'll remember the cases with the children like Archie Battersby last year, whether he should have his treatment withdrawn because he was brain dead, but his mother didn't accept it. That's actually dealt with under the Children Act, so it's children law. But if he were over 18, it would be court of protection. It's a similar principle. So there are lots of cases like that that get into the press. So they're always fascinating to watch out for.
Definitely. And yeah, I mean, it's been a real eye-opener, this episode. You know, we've recorded over 100 episodes and you're our first court of protection lawyer. So it's been really interesting for me to learn about this area of law, and I'm sure for our listeners as well. So thank you so much for, providing your insights into this area of law, which is, like you said, in the news quite often, but maybe not spoken about so much as an area of law.
No,
separate to family law. So I think it's been really interesting to learn more about.
And it's funny, once you sort of come across it, you notice it far more, because it really does touch the lives of so many people.
Yeah.
And quite often people will have grandparents who develop dementia or know someone who has an acquired brain injury, and that's where the court of protection comes in. So it's not talked about very often, but once you know it's there, you'll realise that it comes into a lot of people's lives.
I'm sure I'll recognise it so much more often now. And where can listeners connect with you if they'd like to maybe reach out or just follow your career?
Well, you can find my profile on the Dawson Cornwell website, and then I'm on LinkedIn as well. I'm not a great one for social media, but I am on LinkedIn.
Great. Well, I'll leave links to your LinkedIn and to the firm website as well. So if anyone would like to connect with you, then they can find you there.
Brilliant.
Okay. Well, Philippa, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been great to have you on. And yeah, thank you to all of the listeners as well for tuning in.
Yes, thanks, Camilla, so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
To hear more of the Student Lawyers podcast, hit the subscribe button and leave us a star rating and review. If you would like to join the Student Lawyer as a writer, please email hello@thestudенtlawyer.com. Don't forget that if you're looking for a way to remove the weight of the world from your shoulders, the therapists at BetterHelp are qualified to help you through your daily stresses. Just visit www.betterhelp.com/TSL for 10% off of your first month. That's betterhelp.com/TSL for 10% off of your first month.